The original question is, what will people be doing once machines are doing all the jobs that we do now, or almost all of the jobs that we do now? And the answer is, people will be doing what we want humans to do for us, and to some extent what humans are specially equipped to do. So one big advantage that humans have over machines is that if I want to understand how you would react to something, I can simply simulate how I would react to that. And because my brain and your brain are pretty similar, then I can predict pretty well how you would react to something. But a machine's brain is not similar to yours. So the machine has to sort of do everything from first principles, whereas I can kind of cheat by just using my brain. And so that, and we actually have direct evidence that that's what people are doing. They're able to simulate other people using their own brain. So two things then. I think humans are better equipped to empathize with other humans and to know how to guide another human in the right direction emotionally, how to inspire them, how to help them through the difficult parts of life. Much better than machines can, at least. And the other thing is that we want other people, we want people to do that, right? So I will value certain things being done by humans. And, so, for example, we might at some point in the future have a profession, a professional luncher. So someone who you go to lunch with and the conversation is stimulating and interesting and gives you a whole new perspective on life and inspires you to go out and learn a new skill or something like that. That person has done you a great value. Or even just that you enjoyed the lunch and you feel good that you know that person. But you're not going to get that from a robot. No matter how good the robot is, it's not a human. And so there is some intrinsic value from experiences and attention, the time of another human being. We're just going to value that intrinsically in a way that we're not going to value the time of a machine. So, related to that is the question of whether we should build robots that pretend to be human, right? That where they physiologically they look like people, they have voices like people, they have facial expressions like people. Personally, I think this is a really bad idea, because then you're actually going to chip away at the things that human beings should be doing. You're also lying, it's a form of lying to have a machine pretend to be a person when it really isn't.
But if it has some commercial value to sell robots like humans, then companies will do it.
They may, and I still think it would be a bad idea. I think particularly, if you imagine, how does a small child, a baby, right? Our biology forces us to pay attention to the human face and human shape, and to understand that physical object as a human, as having emotions, having empathy, having intentions, and so on and so forth. So we cannot help but ascribe these things to something that looks and acts like a human. So building humanoid robots is taking advantage of that in a way that's fundamentally dishonest. And I suspect could cause serious psychological problems for children. I don't know that, but that seems quite plausible that could happen. But yeah, so there may be commercial value, and people are talking about that. But interestingly, Alan Turing, so he was the founder of computer science, so in one of his very first papers on AI, he expressed the hope that we would not build human-like robots. He thought that would be a really bad idea. Kind of like, he described them as like plastic flowers.
Had more impact to the human history, Winston Churchill or a car, the invention of the car?
I think I think I would argue Winston Churchill, actually, but because if we hadn't invented the car, we would have invented something similar, right? And obviously the impact is different. The invention of the car created mobility, but in fact, I don't think the life in, let's say, London at the end of the 19th century was so different, right? People were still commuting on trains. They used horse-drawn carriages, but they had, taxis, and they probably would have had Uber with horse-drawn carriages. But life, structurally wasn't that different because of the automobile. The big impact of the automobiles may turn out to be global warming, which people did anticipate at that time, right? I mean, there were people warning us about global warming at the end of the 19th century, and we just ignored that. But Winston Churchill, I assume by Winston Churchill you mean his impact in preventing a German victory in World War II. Had there been a German victory in World War II, history would be very different. Probably Germany would have developed atomic weapons, which would then have enabled them to dominate, even the United States. So things would have been a very different outcome.
Who will have more impact on the human history? Mr. Trump or the artificial intelligence? So as a society, as a global world.
Okay, so to me, I think, in fact, the first talk I gave on this subject was in 2013, and it was a talk in an art gallery in London to a completely non-technical audience. And so to explain this idea, I sort of imagined that we have a competition for what's the biggest event in human history. So it could be that, we all die with a giant asteroid that collides with the Earth, or we all die with global warming, or maybe we all live forever, right? So someone invents the secret of eternal life and we all live forever. So those would be big things. The arrival of a superior alien civilization, that would be a big thing. But I think the arrival of human-level AI would be as big, if not bigger. It would be similar to a superior alien civilization, but it would also solve all the other problems. So it might enable us to live forever. It might enable us to avoid being destroyed. It might enable us to explore the universe. So it would mark a complete change in our civilization. In my view, it'll be the biggest event in human history. And you could just look at it. I mean, I was trying to calculate, just in very rough terms, what is it worth? Just in money, right? So ignoring exploring the universe and living forever, just look at what it would do, to GDP, right? So it would, because once you have human-level AI, then you can very quickly scale up all of the technologies and products that we have, cars, freeways, houses. So you can provide a first world standard of living to everyone on Earth, and you figure this multiplies the GDP of the world by about between 5 and 10. And then if you calculate the net present value, that's something the economists use to turn your income stream into an actual value, it comes to about $10,000 trillion. So that's just in very crude, simple monetary terms, the value of having human-level AI. And then beyond that, right, as soon as you have human-level AI, you're going to have AI that exceeds human capacities along many dimensions. One simple example is that if a machine can read a book, they can read all the books that the human race has ever written. So whatever that comes to 80 million books or something. There's no human being who can do that. You can't even read 1 million books. You'd have a hard time reading 10,000 books. So the scale of knowledge available to machines is going to be far greater than is available to a human being. Probably the ability to map out the future will also be far greater, because with all that knowledge, you're able to sort of track and predict all different aspects of the world simultaneously. So those capacities then allow us to manage our future much better. Right? We can decide on policies based on the impact they're going to have in the real world, instead of just guesswork or ideology.
And if we think about responsibility,
Mm-hmm.
because it's the most important innovation in the human history. So who can keep all this innovation under control?
To a first approximation, nobody. The United Nations is certainly interested in this question. I mean, when the new Secretary General of the United Nations came into office, Guterres, one of the first things he did was to reach out to learn about AI. He wanted a reading list. He wanted guidance on what are the issues that the United Nations should be worrying about. Unfortunately, the United Nations doesn't have any power. All the power resides in the member states, and at the moment, the major powers, China, the US, Russia to some extent, view this as a competition between them. Whoever gets there first wins the world. This seems like a terrible idea, because it encourages focusing entirely on capabilities and not on safety. And as we know from the history of nuclear power, that doesn't end well. So what I'm trying to do at the moment is to solve this very, it's very simple to describe, right? We want to make things that are much more powerful than we are, but we want to make sure they have no power, ever. So how do you do that? It's a very tricky problem. The answer is to actually change the way we think about what AI systems should be. Up to now, we think about AI systems as very intelligent optimizers to which we provide the objectives, and then they come up with the optimal solution, the best possible way of achieving the objective. And the reason that's a bad idea is because we don't know how to specify the objective correctly. And this is what happened with King Midas, right? King Midas said, I want everything I touch to turn to gold, and it turns out that's what he got. And then his food and his water and his family all turned to gold. And then he died in misery and starvation. And so this is the main reason why building AI systems using the current methods and the current understanding is likely to lead to serious problems. So if instead you make AI systems that actually don't know what the objective is, right? So there's there's an underlying objective, which is to maximize human well-being, but they actually don't know what that means. They're uncertain about what we really want. So if King Midas had asked a well-designed AI system, I want everything I touch to turn to gold, the AI system should have said, are you sure? Okay, let me explain why that's a bad idea, and tell you what, let's have a different protocol. Right? You point to something and say, I want this to turn to gold, and then I'll arrange that for you, or maybe I'll tell you why that's a bad idea. That's how you want the AI system to respond, to actually be not just a tool that maximizes the achievement of some stated objective, but something who's responsible for ensuring that things turn out well in the long run, which means entering into a conversation, asking questions, learning more about what humans really want. They don't just want gold, right? They also want to eat, they also want to have family, and many other things. So eventually AI systems should gradually develop the ability to predict for any person what is the life that person would prefer, and then how to help them have at least a better life than they might otherwise.
So that means that we should teach them to moral. But could we? Could we teach them to moral or to ethics?
Well, I don't think of this as morals or ethics. I think of this as it's kind of like this, right? I could show you two movies of your future life. There's movie A and movie B. And you watch movie A, you watch movie B, and you say, yeah, I like movie A better. I prefer this life than that one, right? So there's no moral question, there's not an ethical question. This is just, how would you prefer the future to be for you and the people you care about? And if a machine can predict which choice you will make, then it can help you get the life you prefer, right? And there are complications with that. One complication is that not everyone can have their most preferred life, because their most preferred life might be, I want to be king of the world and super rich. We can't all be king of the world. We can't all be super rich. And so if you have to worry about more than one person, then sometimes there are going to be inevitable trade-offs. So the machine will have to weigh up preferences of one person with the preferences of another. And, the simplest solution to that is you just treat everyone equally.
But makes technology the society equal, or does it divide us? So, is it true or not?
Well, I think it's not strictly true. I think the poor are not poorer, they're relatively poorer. So standards of living, particularly in the developing world, the number of people living, below $2 a day, I think it is, has been dramatically reduced. So poverty, extreme poverty in the world has been enormously reduced through both technology and just better organization. But I think you're right. The effect of automation has been to increase inequality, because there are mainly the what used to be the middle class. A lot of that has disappeared. So high-end manufacturing jobs have disappeared, and low-end management jobs have disappeared. And that was not what people were expecting. So when the internet began, everyone was assuming that it would empower the individual, because now everyone has access to massive amounts of information. Everyone can actually produce content and disseminate it widely. So for example, our little video about autonomous weapons has been seen by 40 million people now, right? And couldn't possibly do that, before the creation of the internet. You would need to own several television stations or a movie company and movie distribution in order to achieve that kind of coverage. So all those effects have happened. People are more informed and more empowered in principle, but that hasn't translated into direct economic benefits for most people. Going forward, I think there's a very serious danger that things will get worse, because if you automate all of the jobs that we have right now that are what you might call repetitive jobs, so where there's something that you do and you do it multiple times a day, and you do it multiple days a year, whatever that is going to be automated. And so that could be more than half of all the jobs that people currently do could disappear. People may find some additional forms of work, but by and large, it's going to create much more of an unequal society. So some economists are predicting that all the wealth will be concentrated in, with the owners of the technology, the people who own the robots, the information technology, the AI, which is producing all the material wealth, right? So it may be that there's a great abundance of material wealth, but the ownership of it's going to be very concentrated, and there'll be a class of people who are essentially servants to the owning class, and then everybody else will, they may have a satisfactory standard of living, but they won't have meaningful work. This is not a future that I think is desirable. People are doing experiments now. What happens if you just give people money and they don't have work? Do things go well, or do people just drink themselves to death? And I think it's inconclusive. Some evidence that actually people can find productive ways to use their time, but there's also, lots of experience with mass unemployment causing alcoholism and crime and general deterioration of society. So it's not clear how things would go. So this is going to be one of the big challenges for AI. I guess I should say it's really a challenge for government. The AI technology, there's really nothing that AI researchers can do to slow it down or even really to divert it, because the technologies that get developed will be the technologies that produce income, that drive wealth. And this is a problem for the economists and for the government to actually figure out how to adjust our education system, our economic system, our social security systems to compensate for the changes that are happening. For some time, I've been concerned about autonomous weapons, as have many other people. So an autonomous weapon is a robot that can, by itself, without direct human supervision, find and kill human targets. And so usually when people think about that, the first thing that comes to mind is the Terminator robot from the movies, and in the media that's usually how it's portrayed. But it's extremely unlikely that we would build such systems. I mean, they're very slow, they're very large, heavy, expensive, and for some reason they keep missing. Right? So they fire all these bullets and they're not killing very many people. Now, if you're a robot and your speed of perception and reaction is 1,000,000 times faster than that of a human, why would you ever miss? Right? I mean, it's just not realistic. In fact, the kinds of weapons people are developing, they include small aircraft that can fly into enemy troops and kill by exploding. And the particular characteristic of autonomous weapons that concerns the AI community primarily is that they will become weapons of mass destruction. And the reason is because precisely they don't require human supervision. So if you have one weapon that by itself can go and find a human target and kill them, you can have 1 million of them, and you don't need any more humans. You don't need a big army. You don't need a huge, defense department with a huge budget and a huge country and a huge military-industrial complex. You just need 5 guys and a big truck and 1 million weapons in the truck, and then you can go wipe out a whole city. Why would we want to create a technology that can be used in that way? It does not seem a good idea from either the point of view of national security, because now your own population centers become vulnerable to these kinds of attacks, or from the international point of view of stability. So I think what we're arguing is that we should have a ban on these weapons. So the point of the movie was to just show, in graphical terms, what it would be like when these weapons become available. And we had to choose, how do we illustrate this? One possibility would be to illustrate a war between 2 countries, but we didn't want to have any one country be the bad guy, because we need to be involved in diplomacy. We wanted to show this in Geneva, where the countries are negotiating about a possible treaty. So we couldn't have any country using the weapons. We thought about terrorism, but terrorism usually ends up stereotyping one particular group as terrorists, and that wouldn't be a good idea. So we decided that, in fact, in the movie, the bad guys would be just corrupt people in high levels. We don't say what country or company or anything. They're just people who are corrupt in high-level positions in the world, and they're using it to suppress dissent in people who might want to, take them out of their positions of power and wealth. And then, and so in the movie, thousands of people are killed and attacks on universities. And I hope that it will have some effect, whether directly in the ongoing negotiations between countries, because I think there's a lot of confusion. I mean, there are countries who seem to believe that these weapons are, decades in the future, or even, impossible, that they require, solving general human level AI before you could build such a weapon, and it's just not true. But it can also be effective through politics, because that way, by popular opinion, you can, people can affect the policy of their government, and then that can have an effect on how the negotiations happen.
My last question is personal. I have a little daughter, little son. So, what do you advise to me or people? So, how can we teach them, educate them to keep the Homo sapiens still the first existence in the world after?
I think the goal of the AI community, or the responsibility of the AI community, will be to to develop AI in such a way that it remains entirely under human control, that the systems are fundamentally incapable of acting in ways that are contrary to human preferences. And it's a very difficult task, but I think we can do it. So my advice, I mean, I have children, I have 4 children. My advice to anyone is to give your children an interest in learning that will carry them through their whole lives, because things are going to change rapidly. Inevitably, most people in 20 or 30 years' time will be doing jobs that probably don't exist today. And so giving them a broad base of knowledge, but particularly knowledge about human life, which can come from literature, which can come from psychology. I think that we still need to teach people mathematical and logical reasoning, but I don't think we should worry too much about, training people for the jobs of today, which we might think of as computer programmers and data scientists and so on. I mean, yeah, we need those jobs, but they may not be around for very long, and they're only ever going to be a very small fraction of employment. So a focus on learning about humanity is going to be increasingly important.